You know, the overarching theme for tonight is transitions, and one of the issues that we are trying to do is think short-term and long-term about transitions. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our long-term thinking about transitions for people with autism. And fundamentally, you know, one of the beliefs as the Director of Education Research is that transitions will be better for people with autism if we can make better use of the K through 12 period of time as a focal intervention period for children with autism. And we're making a lot of headway on that, but I want to talk to you about the challenges about K through 12 intervention and some of the directions that we're trying to go at the Mind Institute. We're taking this very seriously. This is sort of a new mandate and enterprise for us. We've partnered with Josie Bass in order to develop a series of books on this topic. The first one's been released. These books are designed for teachers and school professionals to try to bring the information from the Mind Institute and internationally on autism in an effective way into the classroom. And we plan to do at least 2 or 3 more of these, and hopefully that's going to provide teachers, schools with a little bit more information that they can use to the benefits of children in the classroom. What I'd like to talk about tonight, though, is that you know, there are more children affected by autism in public schools now than at any point in time in the past, and that's not only because of the increase in the numbers that we see in the news, it's because schools are becoming more inclusive. They're not completely inclusive yet. Many of the children with autism in the schools are not affected by intellectual disabilities. Many are affected by intellectual disabilities. So schools have the challenge of working with a great variety of children. They need a great variety of tools to meet the needs of all the children. But one thing is unassailable, that the K through 12 period of time is the most common, most consistent, and most intensive period of intervention available to children with autism. And we have to make use of that in order to maximize the adult transitions of children with autism. Right now, we have focused a lot of efforts in a lot of areas very productively, but perhaps not as much as we need to do on information that's pertinent to instruction and intervention in classrooms. So we're going to make a great effort in that over the next decade. And we know that we need to do this because, at least in data from about 2002, outcomes aren't what we would hope they would be, and I'll talk about that. I'll also talk about possible solutions, which is really targeting, really understanding what's impeding learning in children with autism and going after those processes in addition to content. And I'll give you an example on one of the virtual reality measures that we use, or situations, and also reading comprehension as a potentially important target for intervention with children in schools. You know, we've all heard about the new numbers that have come out, 1 in 88. One thing that's important to understand is you should inform yourself about those numbers. You can. Those numbers come from something called the ADAM Project, the Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network. If you Google ADDM, it will take you right to the CDC site. And every 2 years, they release information on prevalence and incidence. And if you were to go to this ADAM site now and look at the information that they just released that led to all those news stories about 1 in 88, you would have a much better idea about what those numbers mean, because they write out the explanation in clear, plain language for all parents, all teachers, all professionals to understand. One of the things that we need to understand about this is that when we're talking about 1 in 88, so in the past 3 cycles of information coming from the CDC, you know, basically what the CDC does is they go out and they look at a large sample of second graders, and they go out and look at a different cohort every 2 years, but they use the same methods. And they come up with estimates of the prevalence in these large samples of second graders. This time it was 1 in 88. But the CDC says in their discussion that we believe that the rate is around 1 in 100, because they know that there's variability around this 1 in 88. It has been 1 in 105. It has been 1 in 125. It has been 1 in 150 in other CDC studies. So they know there's a lot of variability. So when we see a number like this, we have to say, well, that's just an approximation, and we need to do more research. If you also look, these data come from 11 different states, and the states are from 1 in 147 down to 1 in 47, and they're all over the place. So there's a lot of variability. But let's take this right now as our best estimate. According to that, there's about 600,000 children affected by autism in K through 12. When we come over here to the Institutes of Educational Science, what they try to do is they try to find all children in K through 12 who are affected by autism periodically. And in the same year, 2008, they identified 336,000 children. But these numbers would say it should be 600,000. So you can see we're not yet at the point of identifying all the children in the schools. And that's because this is second grade data, and this is all grades. So we can imagine that over the next 10 years, the IES numbers will start to come closer to the CDC numbers. And as that happens, there'll be even more reason for schools to focus more energy because they'll be serving more and more children. Interestingly, most of the children in K through 12 affected by autism are being served at least 40% of the time in inclusive environments now, in regular gen ed classrooms. That's a big change over the last 10 years, and it's a very positive change. One thing we have to understand is, you can't interpret one child per 88 as a big change, because when we look at the adult population and data from other countries, we see that the adult population is about 1 in 103. So it's not very different, right? And if there was a big change going on, there should be many more children than there are adults, and we're not sure we're seeing that. So we have to be very careful. All this means is we have to be careful about interpreting any of the numbers we see from any one source at any one time. And here you can see one of the best places to go for information about outcomes and what's happening in schools for children with autism is the Institutes for Education Science, or the Institute for Educational Science. If you Google IES, you'll go right there. Then you can type in autism and get right to the types of information that you need. So here is one of the sources of information. They are presenting information on 1,000 secondary students who are affected by autism and what's happening with them. And as you can see, 4 out of 5, 84% attend regular schools now. I started in 1981 in working with children with autism. That was not the case. It was not 4 out of 5 children. It was more like 2 out of 5 children were in regular schools. So now it's 84%, 4 out of 5. We're making a lot of progress in bringing the children into the regular schools where they're probably going to get benefits from interacting with other children. And now we have to help those schools improve the instruction that they provide to those children. It's a big, big change. And we know we have to do that because when we look at the graduation rates, this is from the same longitudinal study that I just showed you. When we look at the graduation rates of, about 800 children with autism that we have data for in that study, we can see that their graduation rates over 8 years is relatively low. This is 43% aren't graduating after 8 years, which is even low for other exceptionalities. So we know that there's some sort of problem with schools providing the information that they want to provide to these children. We also know, at least from these are older data now, so they were basically what was happening to children in outcome circa 2002. We don't know what's going to happen when we see the new data that's closer to 2012. But at that point in time, children were going out as adults and they weren't earning as much as we would hope they would, and many of the children were still relatively dependent on homes. but we're beginning to understand exactly why those outcomes are not as strong as we'd like. It's because we've moved all these children into the right educational environment without necessarily giving schools the information that they need to instruct the children. So when we look at studies of instruction for children with autism, we see that oftentimes we're talking about functional life skills, communication skills, play skills, social skills, but not necessarily academic skills. And most often we're talking about studies which only have 1 or 2 or 3 children in them. This came out in 2008, and nobody felt like this was an accurate picture necessarily, because it was the only review that had ever been provided. But now there's been a review by people at the University of Pennsylvania and a review by people in Europe, and they come to the same conclusion. We haven't provided teachers and schools with enough information on how to do instruction correctly. So we don't want to blame schools. Schools have a lot of things to do, and one of the things that teachers want is more information on instruction for children with autism. They're asking for it. And the reason that they're asking for it is that sometimes what we do is we say, well, we know how to do behavioral interventions. We can teach the schools how to do behavioral interventions to manage behavior. And the teachers say, that's great. That's a great thing to do. But that's not what I'm doing as a teacher. I want to be able to do instruction. So the teachers are actually telling us, yes, this is important, but give us more than that. And so there's a sequence of studies now that say that teachers don't implement behavioral practices as readily as we would hope because they're more interested in instruction. So this is really important. We've really begun to communicate with schools in a way that's really important. In the past, we sort of said, well, we know what to do. You need behavioral interventions. And the schools say, well, that's great, but that's not exactly what we need, you know. So the communication is now there on a national level, which should have a tremendous impact on children over the next 10 years. And we're talking about all children. You know, we're talking about going out beyond 18 into the 20s when we're talking about these educational opportunities. You know, one of the things is that we think about early intervention. So, you know, these curves represent the development of possible neural connections at the tops of all these curves, and then how the neural connections get organized due to learning. And in the preschool period, the first months of life, you know, vision, hearing, and language reach their optimum opportunity for learning, and then they get organized. But look at this. This is for higher cognitive functions. This is for using your frontal lobes to solve problems, to organize information. That reaches its maximum potential somewhere, you know, around 5, 6, 7, 8, and then begins to get organized. We've often used these kinds of graphs to say that it's really important to do preschool intervention because the brain is plastic and the children are going to be very responsive at that point in time. Well, but we now understand that they're going to be very responsive in first grade through 12th, because the area of the brain here, this frontal part, is very plastic in that period of time. So the neuroscience is beginning to tell us, and schools, that there's a great opportunity for intervention in the K through 12 period. One thing we've also started to understand and take seriously is that sometimes, you know, we have lots of these children going in and they have relatively higher IQs, but sometimes their academic achievement doesn't keep pace with their IQs. So they show problems in developing reading skills. They show problems in developing math skills. They show problems in developing writing skills. When we present that information to schools feel like they can deal with that. Sometimes they don't feel like they can deal with autism, but if we say, oh, but people with autism also have reading problems, math problems, and writing problems, they say, well, we know how to deal with that. Help us work on those kinds of problems with children with autism, and we will do that, and we think that that's going to help schools learn more generally how to work more effectively with children with autism. The other issue is that we're trying to work on research here and with the schools and trying to understand how different groups of children who might look the same have similarities but also differences. Teachers often get confused between children with autism without intellectual disabilities and children with ADHD. Both groups of children look like they're not paying attention in the classroom, and teachers can't really see what the difference is. We don't really know what the difference is yet, but schools are telling us that if you can help us understand the difference between ADHD and autism, that's going to help us come up with better programs of intervention for both of them. And so that's another major thing. Now, the research group here is the autism group, and the ADHD group, led by Julie Schweitzer, are working together on grants to do just that. Try to figure out what's the attention problem of children with autism in the classroom, and what are the attention problems of ADHD, how are they similar, and how are they different. We know that's important because ADHD symptoms, when they're at a very high level in children with autism, that seems to have another effect on the children. For example, facial affect recognition is supposed to be something that's very difficult for children with autism, and it can be, but it's more difficult if the child also has high levels of ADHD symptoms. So that's affecting something that's very important. We understand now that ADHD symptoms, something we really need to understand in school-age children with autism in order to maximize outcomes. So that's a little bit of the picture that we have. Let's start talking about some of the problem solving that we're doing. So one idea for autism is that autism fundamentally, children with autism have a lot of difficulty adopting the same frame of reference with other people. They don't as quickly or naturally have the inclination to pay attention to what other people are attending to attend to what's important in a classroom. That's an issue. So what we've started to do, and the Institute for Educational Research has just given us 4 years of funding to do something that hasn't been done before pretty much anywhere. And the first thing is to do a longitudinal study of academic development in elementary and secondary students with autism. How do we help schools work with kids with autism if we don't know how the academic abilities of the children are changing over time? What impedes that? What facilitates that? What are the individual differences? We're at the point that we now recognize what we need to do to help schools. This kind of information is an essential first building block. We also will have a first prospective, meaning we can look across time from one point to another and see what predicts academic development and compare children with autism and children with ADHD. And we'll be doing that over the next 4 years. And then we can also begin looking at this thing that we think is really critical. How well can children pay attention in the classroom? But how do we go into the classroom? It's too expensive and it's too intrusive to go into classrooms. It's just difficult. So the way that we've started to do that is we look at a group of children and we test to see what their academic achievement is. This is the Wechsler individualized achievement test for reading, and this is the one for math. And when we look at our samples, we tend to see that children with autism aren't keeping up as much as we would like to see. And then we bring them into a laboratory and we say, okay, let's see if we can figure out what's leading to that problem in the classroom or in a classroom-like situation. So what we do is we have children come in and they can go into a virtual classroom. And they can see a variety of peers in the classroom. And we can ask them to do something that's important to learn in elementary school and high school. And that is talk to your classmates, give a report, answer questions, pay attention to what somebody's saying to you, think about it, and give an oral response in the classroom. What we've managed to do, the children come in and we have them just look around the virtual room and they can see 9 peers in the room, but they can't see them all at once. They have to remember that some are out of sight and some are in sight. And then what we do is we give them a 3-minute task where we say, we'd like you to pay attention to questions that we're going to ask you, but we'd like you to respond and look at everybody in the classroom while you're responding. And then we have another condition where we say, we'd like you to listen to these questions and respond, but this time, if you're not looking at everybody, they're going to start to fade away. And the fade is just an external cue. It just helps remind the children to look. and we can look at the number of peers that they look at, the number of peers fixated, the number of different peers fixated. So this is the total number of looks. This is the different children or avatars that they look at, and then we can look at the average time. And we see something very, very interesting. So now we have three groups of children: children with autism with high levels of ADHD, typically developing children, and typically developing children with ADHD, otherwise known as children with ADHD, right? And so we can come over here and we can see that when we look at this group, ASD and typically developing, they don't show very much of a difference in being able to talk and look at all the avatars. But if we have this group with autism and ADHD, what do? They look far less frequently at the avatars. But how about this group? What do? Well, they're distractible. They look all over the place all the time. So right away, by putting them in the virtual classroom, we're able to get a handle on what's the attentional difference. And the attentional difference in this study is these children look around the classroom too much. They're very distractible. And these children tend to get stuck and don't look around as flexibly. We think that that's a very important finding because we think we can target that in future interventions. But whether or not it's important comes next. So now we can look at frequency of looking at the classroom avatars, and we can see that that's directly related to, more looking is related to better reading in this sample. And more looking is related to lower parent reports of learning problems. So we get the two pieces of information. We know that we've got a measure of differences that seem to have a relationship to classroom behavior, and then we can look at reading and parent report of learning problems and verify that. Yes, the virtual reality measures are telling us something that's meaningfully related to reading development and parent report of learning problems. So with that kind of information, we were able to go to the Institutes of Educational Science and say, let us study this more. We think that this is a foot in the door to working better with children in the classroom. And they agreed. They said, yes, this has potential. And so we're going to be studying this for 4 years. Hopefully, at the end of the 4 years, we can begin to turn this information into interventions for children that will be effective or have an effect on their classroom behavior. The other thing that we're trying to do is go after reading, reading comprehension. So children with autism have, by definition, communication problems, social communication problems. Regardless of whether they can use language, even when they have language, they don't necessarily use it as in communication as well as other children do. Well, what are some other sorts of areas of communication development? Well, one of them is reading comprehension. Being able to comprehend the words on the page demands a lot of the same sorts of social cognitive abilities that using communication between two people demands. So when we hear that children with autism are not developing reading comprehension as well as we would expect, it says to us, oh, well, basically, when we look at reading comprehension difficulties, it's difficulty visualizing causes and consequences of actions, difficulty with planning, difficulty integrating words, sentences, and passages in meaningful wholes, difficulty following reference. Those are common to many children with autism. In fact, they're part of the core deficits of autism. And they're also part of learning to read, to comprehend. So we think that if we go after reading comprehension, if we can help teachers do a better job on reading comprehension, we're actually going to be able to help teachers target the core cognitive deficits of children with autism because they happen to be the same. That's the kind of thing that we hope to be able to give to teachers. A method of instruction in an area that they're familiar with, reading comprehension, that also happens to be very, very pivotal in intervention for young children with autism. Okay? So that, in 20 minutes, that's a brief synopsis of some of the things that we're trying to do. When we have question and answers, we can go well beyond anything that was up here and talk about any topic that you want, but I'd be happy to talk more about this outline of topics as well. Thank you.
I'm going to be speaking about helping adolescents with autism spectrum disorders to develop social skills. I'm going to start with a little bit of a discussion of adolescent development, friendship development, intervention approaches, and then talk about some future directions. So starting in with sort of a Psych 101 here about adolescent development, adolescence is a really critical period in development for lots of different reasons. Peter spoke to you a lot about K through 12, but this is really a distinct period apart from that. It's a time of rapid growth and change that really is sort of the last watershed before maturation. It's a time, as Peter showed you in his little charts, of rapid higher cognitive development, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It's a time of amazing physical changes. If you know any teenagers, they can grow a foot in a year. It's pretty amazing. It's also a time of social development, things from friendships all the way up to romantic relationships and sexual relationships potentially. It's a time that's really known for identity development. People have to figure out who they are in the world so they can plan accordingly and move on to becoming adults. And it's also a time when individuals need to prepare to become independent. It's a time when we have to start thinking about vocational approaches in later life, avocations, adult peer relationships, and living on one's own. So talking a little bit about some of the adolescent development and why there may be such rapid changes in cognitive development, you can see here starting at age 5 and going up to age 20, there's real changes in the gray matter of the brain. This is a time when we say things are pruning. And actually, these are little time-lapse photos that I can't show you, but what you would see would be that the blue-purple increases as a result of the green decreasing. At the same time, we see white matter tracks increasing in both males and females, and there's sexual dimorphism here, but the direction in both is towards more myelination. So the thought here is that neural circuits become more efficient because some of the excess connections are pruned out, and more efficient because some of the white matter tracks in the brain develop and help neural circuits to operate more efficiently. And that can potentially explain some of the cognitive changes that we see in adolescence. But adolescence is also actually a time of developmental imbalance. The intellectual abilities of children, the relational reasoning, their ability to inhibit their prepotent responses really increase so that they begin to look very mature, yet a lot of psychosocial indices of maturity, things like risk perception, sensation seeking, and impulsivity, resistance to peer pressure, are at really lower levels, so that there's a real difference between their intellectual abilities and their maturity. And this really can lead to problems. If you have any teenagers, you probably know what I mean. It's also a time when social competence goes through another stage of development. There's a return of egocentricity. Latency-age children who are slightly younger, tend to see others' perspectives more easily, but teens tend to start to think of themselves as being the center of the universe. Remember one child coming and saying that something really amazing had happened to them. They were in love with the same person that another person was in love with, and this had never happened in the history of the world. So they tend to think about themselves as being the only people who are going through certain experiences. They begin to turn more to their peer groups and separate from their families, and at the same time have more of a concern with fitting in and being cool. And this is definitely true even of our kids with autism. We see it all the time in our social groups that children are, over time, maybe we work with them for a couple of years, and as they get into later teenage years, they don't want to hear from the leaders. They want to talk to each other. They actually give a little bit of attitude towards the leaders that wasn't there earlier. They also begin to develop bridges to the heterosexual peer group, or maybe a same-sex peer group, and they need to learn to manage romantic relationships. Another thing that becomes very important and has received a lot of attention is the importance of friendships for individuals with autism. Friendships in typical development are associated with improved self-esteem, decreased anxiety, less loneliness, less peer victimization, because if you have a group surrounding you, you're less likely to get picked on the playground, and reduced risk of later adjustment problems, potentially because you're having social relationships that are ongoing, so you get a lot of practice. On the flip side, peer rejection is associated with anxiety and depression, and there is a circular relationship between your own self-esteem, how peers perceive you, and then depression and anxiety again. So in typical development, friendship is really important. For cognitive development, friendship is also very, very important, because having friendships associated with academic achievement, reduced school dropout, the acquisition of pro-social skills, interpersonal competence in dealing with others, better social problem solving, improved play and language skills, and skill development, which leads to then having more friends. So you probably know or have an idea of what friendship is, but just to sort of put up a picture of typical friendship development, here's a clip of two typical friends that work in our social skills program. Now you guys are friends?
No.
How long have you guys been friends?
It's fifth grade.
Yeah, fifth or
No,
fourth grade.
fourth, sorry.
How did you guys become friends?
School.
School, and we both played guitar. And so we spent a lot of time
Don't put a guitar hero.
spent a lot of time doing that together.
Uh-huh. So now, I just want to ask you, how do you know when someone's your friend? I mean, maybe Adam, you can tell me first, and then Suraj second. What does being a friend mean to you?
When somebody, will be there for you when you're in trouble, when, you can share a few jokes with the person, when you'd like to be around them, like to talk to them.
How about you, Suraj? What do you think?
Exactly, like when they'll be there for you if you're in need or help. And when someone that you can get along with, or you're close with, you do homework with.
Now, have you guys ever had an argument and had to, make up? And
Yes.
can you tell me a little bit about that?
No. It's not appropriate.
Okay, so how do you know those guys are friends? Any thoughts? This is the audience participation part of the program.
They seem real comfortable with each other.
Real comfortable with each other, yes, they are. They've been friends for a long time. They laugh at a lot of the same things.
Physical proximity.
They're real close to each other physically. Anybody else have any ideas? Well, they've been friends for a long time. They actually are doing the same activity. They've come to volunteer at our social skills groups. They have a lot of shared jokes. They actually have a lot of shared activities. They obviously were going to collude against me and not let me know what their little source of problem had been. So they're about 13 at the time this was taken. They are, you can see, exhibiting a lot of the traits of sort of typical friendship. In adolescence, in typical friendships, there's an increase in mixed sex interactions, and other sex interactions gain more importance. There's a lot of intimate self-disclosure. You saw these guys disclosing. They spend a lot of time together in typical development, and really, in conjunction with another person and away from your family, you begin to develop an identity that starts to serve as the basis of your adult identity. Because we're in a way station here towards adulthood, and in adulthood, there's going to be a whole new social network that's created by the circumstances of your living alone and working in a work environment. And there's a lot of same-sex friendships, but there's also opposite-sex friendships. If you get busy doing work-related things, that colors how often you see your friends. And really the goal in adulthood is to be able to have your own family eventually and develop an ability to make intimate relationships that'll take you through your life. Now, what do we know about friendship in pre-adolescence and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders? We know a while back it was thought that kids with autism really didn't experience these social emotions like loneliness and jealousy. But thanks to Connie Kassery and Nurit Bauminger, there was a series of studies that really showed this wasn't the case. But alarmingly, close to half of individuals with autism have no friends. Less than 10% were reported to have truly reciprocal friendships. They have fewer friends in general, shorter friendships, less contact with their friends, lower quality relationships, and some of them never see friends outside of school. Sometimes they experience neglect and rejection in schools, and the statistics are actually even worse for young adults. Some recent studies out of Marcia Seltzer's group showed that once kids graduate from high school, especially the higher functioning kids who don't receive as many services anymore, things are really bleaker. So we wanted to study friendship more in pre-adolescence and adolescence several years ago. So our colleague Nurit Bauminger in Israel came here and we set up a study to investigate what children looked like when they came into a laboratory with their friends. And we found, very encouragingly, that we were able to recruit kids with friends of more than 6 months, which is one of the inclusion criteria, that is kids with autism. And we wrote a series of 5 manuscripts that documented essentially that kids with autism did exhibit lower quality friendships with somewhat less intimacy, but there were a lot of aspects of their friendships that were similar to typically developing kids. They laughed a lot, they had a lot of shared enjoyment in their interactions, they had a lot of common interests, and friendships that were of one child with autism and one child with typical development looked a little bit better in this big coding system that we created, but they looked relatively similar actually. We also took a look at cognitive abilities. In my study, I took a look at abstract reasoning, and that's basically the ability to establish categories in a card sorting task. So coming up with, we had a set of about 6 cards that were different colors, different shapes, and you had to sort cards in different ways you could, based on the categories, or concept identification. And we found that kids with autism were impaired in both these abilities, but children who had stronger abstract reasoning abilities had friends who reported that the friendships were more intimate and close. And I think that that's a really important finding, and it's something that we work on today in our socialization program. There are a lot of ways to teach kids that are teenagers and friendship skills and relationship skills. Generally, when children are younger, a lot of approaches are one-on-one, more applied behavior analytic approaches, for whom kids in this age range aren't necessarily appropriate. Certainly not appropriate for the really higher functioning kids. And they really don't teach you how to become involved in a large group of peers, generally. Most of those interventions are dyads or triads at most. We actually started an intervention back when I was a postdoc, now 10 or 12 years ago. It was a 20 to 30 week approach. We've made it longer over time, of 1.5 hour group sessions, and they take a really kind of eclectic approach to teaching social skills. Our agenda includes an opening circle, game time and a snack time, a lesson time, an outside time and a joke time. And this isn't really rocket science. A lot of people have done similar things, but we've done it for a lot of time now. And in our adolescent group, we have our eye on the future. So we're always thinking about what kinds of things can we teach to help kids with college and vocational training, holding a job eventually, earning a living, living independently, maintaining social relationships, finding a life partner, developing other interests, maybe even parenting. So we're always thinking about those things when we deliver our lessons, because we believe that really to get kids adjusted in adulthood, you really need to be working in adolescence a lot with these kids to help them develop these skills. So, as I said, this was my postdoctoral project. Now, currently this year, we have 5 groups running. Kids are 5 to 8, 9 to 11, or 12 to 18. Back in 2008, one of the few, at that point, reviews in the literature cited ours as being one of the only randomized controlled trials of social skills intervention, and we are part of the National Professional Development Center evidence base. One thing we've always been very concerned about in our groups is the presence of comorbid conditions in our kids. As Peter mentioned, attentional issues are a big issue when you work with this population. Depression is a very common comorbidity, as is anxiety and behavioral problems. We do try to screen out children with very severe behavioral problems that would impair with functioning of the groups, but we still do see behavioral problems. And this last year, we published a paper that I think is really relevant, and as I looked through some of the clinical measures we'd completed on our kids this year, it really rang home, rang true to what we saw in this paper, is that we think that girls in adolescence may be at greater risk of psychopathology and internalizing psychopathology than boys, so depression. And as I looked through all the measures this time around, all the girls reported higher levels of anxiety than the boys and depression than the boys, so an interesting issue. We start our teen groups with a beginning circle. Here we have questions that progressively become more introspective and abstract, going from the principle that if we can teach kids to abstract better, they have a better chance of becoming good friendship partners. So we start with very basic questions about movies, games, ice cream, and food, but then talk more about things. What did you learn about yourself in group by the time we get to the end of the group? We always try to keep our groups very divided into very different activities to give the kids a lot of different opportunities to interact with different people and to do a lot of different things. This is our structured game time, where we try to teach kids to practice the skills required to play simple games. Anyone can play simple games, and you can even be really good at simple games even if you don't have a lot of language or you have a lot of severe autism symptoms. And we really use the time to work on promoting sportsmanship and to prevent cheating. We definitely, I see some giggling out there from somebody who might know what I'm talking about. We have a lot of lesson ideas. They were published in 2004 in the paper we wrote. They've also, to a certain degree, the Longitudinal curriculum. There's now a curriculum that's out there that's a published book that uses a lot of the same curricula. So I can get you a copy of this paper if you're interested. And we run through a lot of different topics ranging from problem solving to knowing your feelings, to knowing how to have a conversation, to knowing first impressions, to knowing what kind of clique you'd belong to. The goals of our last activity, Joke Time, are to teach jokes and scaffold the development of a sense of humor, to continue teaching about irony, sarcasm, metaphors, more aspects of abstract reasoning, and to give a safe place for feedback and joke telling. And I'd like to say that over the time that I've been doing this, I think that intervention has really improved in this area. We were one of the few groups even studying it back 10, 12 years ago, and now there have been multiple recent review articles talking about different curricula. Social skills groups are considered to be an evidence-based practice now. There are several funded intervention trials by the NIH in schools and clinics, and as Peter mentioned, schools is really a good frontier for these, and we've seen a lot of papers this year on interventions in schools, and it's wonderful to see. There are several recent published manuals, and now we're working ourselves, actually. I have a postdoctoral fellow this year who's working to develop some better measures for the groups. We've also begun to work with, thanks to the funding of Autism Speaks, on campus, trying to help some of the college students here. So one of the first big goals, and we've been working on this with the SED, is to educate all who work with the students. And I spoke today to one of our representatives who's working on campus about this, and we think that next year an autism intervention will be folded into the orientation week, and there's several grants that have now started on campus to maybe expand some of the services offered. There's actually a wonderful 30-week program on campus that's been going for many years to help students transition, and there's thought of including students with autism in that component, because now there's very many students at UC Davis who have autism. We've got the housing and orientation staff and student judicial affairs staff and teaching assistants and resident assistants involved about 2 years ago. And a resource guide was done by the Student Disability Center. College is a great way station, actually, before real life, because it really gives you a chance to practice in a less structured environment some of the skills you'll need to work. Academia actually tends to require fewer social skills and tolerates or even encourages eccentricity in some cases. So I can say now that having worked with kids 10, 12 years ago, virtually everyone I worked with has gone off to one form of college or another. So it's very exciting to see. We've tried somewhat successfully and somewhat unsuccessfully, depending on the year, to get a peer support group going. It's been a real systems learning process over on the campus for us to work there, but we have tried to get the students together. Transition to employment, through the teaching of social skills, we're trying in adolescence to teach some of the issues that are going to be important, things like negotiating interpersonal relationships, public speaking, dealing with bosses, people in authority who you might not necessarily agree with, managing your own mental health, and knowing when to get help when you need it. If you'd like to participate in the Mind in some studies of young adults, you can contact my research assistant, Jonathan. And I want to just say it's an exciting time for teaching social skills. There's calls for greater methodological rigor, greater use of new paradigms from the academic literature, social psychology kind of paradigms, lots of funded trials that are going on and larger ones, the publication of manuals, which is the first step towards good empirical studies. Some of the first studies of moderators of treatment effectiveness. There was a study that used our curriculum this year that actually showed that having ADHD was a negative factor in your response to treatment. Availability of new high-tech treatment tools like the virtual reality and some of the computer-based treatment tools that have gained a lot of foothold in the academic literature. But we work in a clinic setting, and we still think that clinic-based socialization programs and we've been able to work in a case management sense with families and with siblings, will also continue to have a niche. So I just want to thank all my sources of funding and all my colleagues. This year we were very fortunate to receive a donation from the Thomas P. Raley Foundation, from Joyce Teal and Jim Teal. So thank you.
It's really good to be with you all tonight. This is a really important topic. And I really am. So it's such a pleasure for me to be working here at the Mind Institute with such incredibly bright and competent people. And one of the things that I get to do is I'm the social model person living in the medical model world, and I get to work with some really great folks. One of the things that I do is be able to translate a lot of this for the community. And the Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities is the wonderful group of people that I work with here at the Mind Institute. And as you said, again, we accomplish our mission through advocacy, community partnerships, and interdisciplinary training. So we get to work with a wide variety of partners out in the community. And my job is working as a transition projects coordinator and assisting with the youth who are coming out of high school and into adulthood and beyond throughout the lifespan. So everybody has their own statistics, and I'll just run through these pretty quickly. According to the Department of Developmental Services, they're serving now over 250,000 people, and half of those folks are under the age of 18, so they're feeling this huge rush. In the state of California, just talking to the folks from the Department of Education, there's 678,000 students here in California that receive special education services. Now that's a wide variety of different students, but there's a huge dropout rate for the kids that we serve, and that truly is a problem, and of course Dr. Mundy talked about that. And again, when you're thinking about outcomes for young people and what we want in this world, in all of our lives, we really do want to be able to go on to further education, we want employment, we want real jobs, and we want to live good, purposeful lives in the community. And Department of Labor states that in California, less than 2% of the Californians with developmental disabilities actually have gainful or sustainable employment. Again, already alluded to this evening that, the elephant in the room for a lot of our educators is that they work really hard and they see now a very diverse group of students in the classroom, and they definitely do need new tools and new resources. Even just, locally, there's a huge number of students that are in general education, but there's an awful lot still that are going through transition programs that are uniquely developed just for the students that we have with autism and other developmental disabilities that are not mainstreamed. So when I first got here, I started talking with a wonderful group of families and educators out in the community, the transition professionals that we have working in the community at community colleges and transition programs and employment programs, and they said to me, we really need to know what our options are. What are our resources when we move from K through 12 and childhood, and our loved ones and our students hit age 18, legal adulthood, and what does that mean for all of our kids, and how that's going to impact their lives. So I developed a project called Success Defined, and it's been really a pleasure to meet lots of different families that have come in to talk to us about their students. And we do this as a student-focused plan. It's a partnership where I think for a lot of families that we're meeting, it's the first time where the parents are really looking at their students as a partner in the planning process and not as, just their child. And so they're really, required to sit down and focus on a family vision. Where do you want your son or daughter to be in 5 years? And then the students that come in and join us, they're partnered with facilitators. These, again, are all transition-age professionals that are out in the community, and self-advocates, adults themselves with developmental disabilities who come in as peer mentors and work with the youth around their outcomes and expectations. We use a lot of materials that were developed here in California through the Leadership Through Personal Change project, through the Department of Developmental Services. We did a lot of field testing with these materials, and basically what they are, it's a starting point. They're conversation starters, they're guides, they're opportunities for people to start thinking about what's going to work for them and their students. So we ask students to develop a mission statement, and for those of you who've been to Success Defined, and I see lots of wonderful familiar faces out in the audience this evening, you know that when the students are able to come up to the podium and talk about what their mission statement is, even those students who maybe are only able to use a few words at a time, you really get a sense of their pride and their enjoyment in being able to share with their families what's important to them. We're trying to set this up as a real advocacy and empowerment project. We recognize that by the time kids are going through high school and are coming out the other end, there's just not a whole lot of really positive outcomes that they're receiving, either through their IEPs or through their education process, and we really want to change that. And one of the ways that we feel we can change that is through empowerment and the importance of really igniting the parents and family members, loved ones, the people that care about our students, to focus in on what's important for them as a family, identify what works and what doesn't, and then let us help to figure out what those resources are that are lacking. Having an inclusion vision obviously is really important for lots of reasons. We need to be able to use this through person-centered planning, which we focus all of our experiences on with families, so that they have a chance to really think about what is important to my son or daughter. What brings them joy? What makes them happy? What are their skills? What are those things that they really want to focus in on, so that we can hopefully turn that into opportunities through higher education and employment. It also gives opportunity to increase community participation. We think that that's really important. Oftentimes the students that we come in contact with seldom leave the school campus. They're not given the opportunities for internships. They're not given opportunities even through the workability or the TPP programs to go out and get a lot of volunteer experience or work experience. And so we're really trying to work with the teachers around what are some of those barriers and push that through with parent involvement. And again, being able to come up with a family vision as well as a student mission statement, it helps students and parents when it's time to go in for those IEPs and when it's time to sit and work with the educators and work with all the others that tend to be in the lives of our students. It gives them a focal point. It gives them more power in the IEP meeting to have for themselves their own plan, their own wishes for outcomes, and be able to be a part of that planning process. So we use the different tools. All of these tools are proven. They're readily available. They're up on websites. They're free. They are wonderful opportunities for people to get the conversation started. Again, they are person-centered planning tools, which means that if you focus them around the students, as a family, you can create your own success. What does success mean to you as a family and as individuals? So we're talking a lot with families during our training and thereafter. We follow families throughout the school year. We really try very hard to stay connected with those families who are working through their own transition, and they're in various stages of transition. We accept students 15 years old to about 22, 23, but we've been known to accept others because we have a real hard time saying no around here. And the importance of that is if you have students that really are kind of out there in the world, there's not a whole lot of things going on for them, and there's not a lot of futures planning that has been done, we really want to be able to put the materials and the resources in the hands of the family members. So the traditional IEP, I was really shocked. I've worked an awful lot with people who have very complex challenges, old school community inclusion specialist. I worked for the last 25 years getting people out of developmental centers, skilled nursing facilities, institutions, and helping people to get into the community with good lives, with supported living, independent living, supported employment, and those other generic resources that are out there available to all of us. And I was really shocked to hear how many teachers and parents and students came forward to say that students were really not participating in their IEP. Now, where I come from, if you're not leading your own individual program plan, or IPP, which is known if you receive regional center services, there's a problem there. And so one of the things that I was really struck by was how many teachers were really uncomfortable even sometimes having students in the room. Now that's not a statement on the quality of the teachers. I think that that's a statement on when there's just not an awful lot of resources to offer families and we really don't have good options for them, we kind of get stuck. And one of the beauty, I think for me, a beautiful part of the student-centered planning process is it allows the student, no matter who they are, and how they articulate their dreams and their interests and the things that promote them into feeling successful, to invite to their meeting who they want to have a mentor, a friend, a family member come, to be able to do the planning ahead of time prior to the IEP, remembering that it is their meeting. Nothing about us without us. You hear that a lot around here. Because if we aren't teaching empowerment, if we're not teaching advocacy skills to our young people while they're in high school, we're really missing a huge opportunity. So, a traditional IEP can be, 8 or 9 people sitting around the room and really looking at it through a deficit model. And a good student-led IEP is going to be one where the student, the family member, and the individuals that care about them work in partnership with teachers. I hear way too often that people have to go in and fight for what they want. And we all recognize that there is a huge fraying of our service system, and the resources that we have, generic and otherwise, are really in trouble. And so one of the things that I know is that we really need to get on the same page with each other. Resources are limited. We don't have an awful lot of time to waste. When students are in high school, that is their time to focus in on transition and do that planning. Otherwise, what we're seeing is an awful lot, especially those students who may or may not get regional center services who have autism, a lot of what we're calling the generation of couch surfers. We have to start the planning while people are in high school. So one of the things that we focus in on, well, actually 3 things that we focus in on through Success Defined is Think College, and making sure that everyone has a measurable outcome in their IEP that's going to focus in on post-secondary education of some kind. Community colleges, 4-year colleges, tech schools, trade schools. It doesn't really matter, but we're really encouraging all of our students to be thinking about what's next after high school, and trying to share with them the true differences in attending high school versus going on to a community college campus, and the benefits of doing that and helping them to get connected. I'm so proud of the fact that in our area we have the Northern California Think College work group that we created here, and we have some truly dedicated, wonderful professionals who meet once a month, who are, and I see a few of you here tonight, and I'm really glad you're here, who are working as disability service provider directors in the community colleges. We have folks coming from high schools. We have good transition teachers. We have parents whose kids are going through the transition process. And we have a lot of others out in the community who want to assist young people to get good jobs and help with housing and community living. Competitive integrated employment. California's working on employment first legislation right now. It's an awful lot of conversation with some really good people who are trying to influence the fact that one of the things that we need to get our heads wrapped around for this new generation of people, young people, is that they want to work and they need to work, and that all people need to work. We need to be redefining what that means in terms of just allowing folks to go to day wasting programs, or going home and kind of sitting in mom's kitchen all day, or going and hanging out at a movie theater once a week. That's not real purposeful living. And so we're really looking to our partners out in the community to help us think about what resources and tools are available for people. And again, my belief is that it definitely starts with person-centered planning, but we need to be able to hook folks up with appropriate resources and services and then follow through as a team, a transition team that's purposeful. So we have 25 people who consult not only on our Success Defined project and come here on Saturdays when I call them to spend time facilitating families and students, but we also have them available to all of those families as mentors and consultants when they go out into the community and they get ready to graduate high school and they want to be thinking about attending one of our local community colleges or one of our universities. So we put together a chart to kind of help people think about. We're often asked, well, give me an organization chart. And the truth is that it's really tough to do that. Depending on who you are and how you roll and which community you work in or live in is really going to prescribe what's available to you and what's not. We have a lot of people out in rural communities that don't have anywhere near the amount of services that we have in some of our larger communities, and yet they have the same mandates and same ideally the same mandate and the same purpose that they're supposed to have as everyone else does. But that's not necessarily the case. We tend to focus in on vendored services through the Department of Developmental Services for those folks who do get regional center. And what we're learning from the many families that are coming up who have kids with autism and other disabilities that do not get regional center is that we really need to be able to focus on what's out there for everyone else. And that includes Department of Rehab, EDD, it includes our one-stop centers, and we have to start those relationships and figure out how to pull all of these people together to help us to get there and to be successful. So available pathways, we have an awful lot of conversation with students around who's getting the high school diploma, who's getting the certificate of completion, who's going on to the transition program until they're 22, and who's walking away basically with nothing because they don't want to be there anymore. And we have all of those families that come to us through Success Defined, and so we just try to remind people about what's possible with a diploma, and then what's possible with certificate of completion. Oftentimes people think that if my student doesn't walk away from here with a high school diploma, that they're not going to be able to go to college, or they're not going to be able to get a good job, and that is not necessarily the case at all. There are more steps involved, and you need to bring in more people to help with that, but we can certainly move those students forward. I would much rather have our students participating on a community college campus with good facilitation and support as needed and taking classes than I would in a traditional day program where they're not going to be getting a whole lot of exploration out in the community, working with with peers and others out there. So let's see. We talk a lot about the post-secondary goals, and I won't go into a lot of this, but there's because it kind of opens up a big can of worms about what's important for people. You have to have measurable goals. And teachers know it, parents need to know it, and everybody really does need to be working together. And of course, Dr. Mundy spoke about that, about the importance of being able to put the goals out there, but then follow them along and make sure that there's the good outcomes that come from that. There's different websites that people are able to access. The National Secondary Transition Tech Assistance Center is a great user-friendly website for family members as well as for teachers. And again, we're really trying to facilitate that partnership between the parents and the teachers that come to us through Success Defined, and being able to have them work as allies rather than adversaries. It's extraordinary when you're able to see teachers coming in on a Saturday. We had, I think, 8 or 9 teachers that came in the first day of winter break in December this last year. And, we applauded them. It was a huge commitment on their part. And what they're saying is a lot of these teachers have been put in situations where they're either teaching transition for the first time, or they're teaching transition with very limited resources in their school districts. And so being able to come here and work on behalf of those students and those parents was terrific. So we use a lot of those resources that are available to all people with disabilities, and certainly the rest of us out in the community. Yo Disabled and Proud is a wonderful organization that's put on through the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. Talent Knows No Limits is all around employment and helping folks to get on through the LEAP program and being able to understand what's available to you when you start working. We have some great materials out at the tables that I hope that you all will pick up. We have lots more. I personally am a minimalist. However, my office mates often accuse me of being a hoarder because one of the things that I know that's really lacking in this world of transition is information. And although we can always send it out to you with PDFs, there's nothing better, I think, than picking up that one piece of paper that you really want to go home and explore a little bit more deeply to see if that's going to work for you and your family. We talk a lot in Success Defined and throughout our trainings that we do here at the SED about the importance of disability disclosure and disability awareness and acceptance, and that's not always easy for a lot of our students. A lot of our students recognize it very clearly in themselves, and yet we do have more than not students who have been told their whole life, there's nothing wrong with you, it's everybody else. And what we need to really do and help those students is to be able to empower them, I think, to really embrace who they are, learn how to ask for help when needed, and to define for themselves and those around them how they can be successful, to do that really good exploration of self. And it works. It's very exciting to see students get empowered again about who they are and how they can recognize what works for themselves. There are an awful lot of materials that have been developed around person-centered planning that give people information about voting and about leadership and self-advocacy, self-determination, feeling safe, being safe, end-of-life planning, and on and on and on. And I think one of the things that we really try to promote is for people to get involved, become good advocates, learn how to move and maneuver through this community by being a part of the leadership. How are decisions made? Learn how those decisions are made, be a part of that decision-making process, and get involved. So the Mind Institute has some really great stuff. And then finally, I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't say that because of, everyone in this room I know is feeling the effects of services diminishing and really not sure how we're all connecting. It seems that a lot of us are doing an awful lot of different things. And I really implore you to go and talk to one colleague, one neighbor, one family member about what they're doing or what they know about how to promote successful lives, purposeful lives for people with disabilities in your community. And I think, it's got to be that one fish at a time thing. So anyway, it was good to be with you all, and I think we're here for questions, and thank you very much.
My question is for Dr. Solomon. You mentioned campus transition programs at UC Davis. Is there anything similar coming to local junior colleges like Sacramento City College?
Well, I think I'm going to give that over to Sharon because she'd probably be better to answer that than me. The programs that are going on, there's a very dedicated group of individuals who've realized that coming to UC Davis are now 30-odd students a year with autism spectrum disorders that are self-identifying, and so they're really scrambling to try to figure things out. And this wonderful program they've had going for 30 years may be the basis for something really good starting. But I don't know about the community colleges.
Yeah, well, actually, there are some different groups that happen depending on the community college always. You really want to start with your Disability Services Center and find out about the clubs on campus and the organizations. Sac City has a wonderful group called Voices of Hope. They also are looking at starting kind of a job club specific for students with autism. American River College has, it's Think Outside the Box Club, I think, is what they've actually named themselves. And they are a group of students with autism that are trying to figure out how to maneuver their campus. Consumnes River College has some wonderful folks on campus through the Disability Services Center, and they really want their focus to be around work exploration, so people come together to talk about jobs. There's also People First for people with developmental disabilities. Nothing About Us Without Us, and Supported Life Institute here in Sacramento does a wonderful job connecting our region through the Self-Advocacy Coordination Project. There's a lot of good opportunities for people to get out there. There's also resources for independent living and CFILCs and all of that, and you can find them on the different campuses, or at least a lot of their more vocal members. You can find them on the campuses, and they get involved. I was just at Sac City today, doing Disability Awareness Day. It was wonderful. They had hundreds of students out there and representatives from the community. So they're out there. Just gotta ask.
Okay. Hi. What is the path to social skills training for those kiddos that have behavior problems?
We actually published a really interesting trial in 2008 of an intervention called parent-child interaction therapy that we used with a group of kids with autism spectrum disorders and clinically significant behavioral problems. And I think that is a really wonderful intervention. It is offered through the Care Center here at UC Davis, and they trained a bunch of member agencies, and the issue of PCIT for people with autism spectrum disorders has become pretty popular. So I think that might be a good first step. Give a call over to the Care Center, and I could give you a name there, and then ask if there's any member agencies providing services to individuals with autism spectrum disorders. That's just one idea. We do obviously see kids with a lot of behavioral issues that if you understand what the issues are, you can really manage them very effectively. But in-home behavioral programs are another way that some of our individuals who've worked with us who haven't really been able to make it in a group are able to make it. So we generally view participation in a large group that can be a little noisy and a little overwhelming as an endpoint for some people who need first to get their own behaviors under control.
I work for Parent-Child Advocacy Network. We are a nonprofit organization that advocates, support, train, and do everything else for families, parents who have children with special needs from 0 up to 30 years old. So I have two questions. One is for Sharon. I want to ask you if we invite you to come to our transition fair. Are you willing to come? And also, please say yes.
I don't dare say no.
And also, in our organization, I do the transition, let's say the transition version in Spanish. My coworker does the English version, so I would like to know if there is material in Spanish also. We do have support groups, and in the Spanish group that I am facilitating, I always ask the parents to come with the children who are in transition age. Usually they ask me for childcare and bring the little ones and leave the transition age kid at home. And so one of my requirements is to bring the child who I want to see, and I will give you childcare. So, so it will be great if we have materials and also information in Spanish for the families. In our culture, it's a little bit different. So it's more like you were saying, staying at home, sitting at the kitchen, watching a movie, And I am trying to change that.
Yeah, well, thank you, and welcome from Napa. That's awesome. You know, very much so. We have a wonderful consultant through the SED, Angie Rivera. She's a co-founder of the Fiesta Educativa that happens in Southern California and Northern California. And we're working really hard through the SED to get all of our materials in both Spanish and English. And I would be pleased to come to Napa.
My name is Karen Crosby, and I'm from the Bay Area, and I'm repeatedly disappointed by the lack of programming for adults or young adults with autism in the Bay Area, especially in the San Francisco Greater Bay Area. And many of the schools where they are housed treat them like turnips, especially nonverbal children who have skills and mental IQ. The fight for an iPad for a communicative device is unacceptable. It's very hard to get even the brightest nonverbal child an iPad with a talking program. I've noticed many of these nonverbal children have substantial abilities, and we can't even begin to get them anything other than cleaning up a park or cleaning up a beach. Do you see any other way of breaking into the Bay Area, because there's a very large population, and Silicon Valley, and get some kind of employment for all levels, including nonverbal, other than cleaning up parks and beaches?
And welcome from the Bay Area. You guys are amazing. That's quite a drive. Yes, absolutely. East Bay Innovations is a supported employment organization that works out of Alameda and Oakland, and they do a kind of a project search, if you will, where they work with the hospital there and they assist people with autism and other developmental disabilities to get jobs. Also in San Francisco, I know the ARC is working really hard to develop programs, and they still seem to be kind of the leader in making sure that people are able to stay in the community and get work. But I have to tell you that a lot of organizations, even the good ones, are saying it's very difficult to get employers now. It's very difficult to find jobs. If you look at the unemployment rate and the state of our economy for everyone, it's very tough to find jobs. The state of California is still hiring. They have the LEAP program. They encourage people with disabilities to come in and fill out those applications and get those jobs. And I know you have an awful lot of state, county, and city in the Bay Area. But I think that, you know, calling these town halls and getting folks together and figuring out what resources can each of these organizations and entities bring to the table. We need to be able to do that more. We're no longer able to work as islands that are specific vendors. We have to be able to work together and draw each other's resources in.
I'm an autism specialist with Placer County, work with nonverbal students, and one big thing that we're finding is with the tech, with the iPads, things like that, I get it for like a day or two a week, if that. That's not enough time for me to explore it, not enough time for the kids to get to learn it. Then I get slapped with a piece of paper saying, how did they do, you know? And so then I got to turn it back in. So it's sort of that revolving door. But you know, with some of your research, you talked about, I guess, higher functioning students with autism. Can you tell us anything about ongoing research with students who are nonverbal, especially maybe in transition from junior high to high school to adulthood? Because I work, well, with junior hires, and so it's a long road, and so we want to be able to plan with the parents at junior high and give them some type of skills that they can take with them. So what are your recommendations? What are some thoughts that you may have along that? Sure. And maybe some social skills.
It's a national priority at the moment to direct as much effort as possible to trying to help children who might be apraxic. For example, a lot of you have commented on very bright children who are having difficulty with verbal communication because that can go along with the syndrome of autism. At UCLA, we collaborate with people at UCLA, and they actually have a targeted program now to try to work on improving instruction and improving academic outcomes for children who are nonverbal but are capable of responding to curriculums based on using iPads, using alternative communication devices and things of that nature. It's a very difficult thing to do, though. I mean, it's children with autism who are nonverbal have a lot of potential. There's a lot of children with developmental disabilities who are nonverbal that have a lot of potential, and we haven't really realized the potential of any of those groups, let alone children with autism. So it's almost like it's not an isolated thing in terms of autism. It's an endemic problem, and we need to bring more teachers with more information to bear. I mean, that's going to be the solution. It won't be a magic piece of research. It'll be just greater effort by more informed people in the schools. And it is, the silver lining here is that this is now one of the top priorities for the National Institutes of Health in terms of funding autism and in funding communication disorders in general.
My name's Steve Koyasako. I have a son who's aging out of the school system this year. And so I'm open to any kind of suggestions that you might have for us as a family in addressing that. I also have a couple of questions. One is the Mind Institute considering at all working on developing or studying effective interventions and supports for people who are over the age of 22? And second, I was wondering if this presentation on the slides were going to be posted on the website so we can get the references. Yeah. Thank you.
Let me just address the second question, and then maybe others can talk specifically to the issue with your question about your son. The Mind Institute is trying to do many, many things. So at the moment, we've got several things going on in terms of the practicalities of increasing the opportunities for better transition planning. We're trying to get into the schools to begin to actually figure out how to do intervention there, and that will actually go up through age 22. And then once we have some understanding of that, we need to understand how to approach the problem that people are having. And, frankly, we don't know what the problems are. We don't know the length and breadth of them because so much of the work has gone towards understanding autism in particular as an early onset disorder and getting in and intervening early. That's been very, very important to do. We're now at a more mature phase of research where we're beginning to realize that autism doesn't stop after the preschool period, that it continues on, it changes, it develops, people with autism develop, they change, and we have to do developmental studies and then do intervention based on that. And one of the issues is, as I tried to point out in my slide, is we don't have any of that information yet. I mean, we could go out and begin to try to do interventions, but we just don't know where to begin. But we will know where to begin within the next 10 years because now, for example, the Institute for Educational Sciences is funding specifically that. They're saying first understand what's going on in elementary and secondary, build that for us, and then that should begin to apply to adults as well. So it's a half answer to your question. Yes, we're moving in that direction, but we're trying to go at it from sort of elementary, secondary, and then into adult once we understand what to do at elementary and secondary levels.
And I think, too, just to follow up with regard to planning and the importance of really sitting down and figuring out what's important to us and what do we want to do next, finding out who those allies are in your life, pulling those people together. People have great meetings in their living room. If you care about my son, come and be a part of this. We're going to be having this once a month. It's going to be his planning team, and we're going to be talking about who's got a job opening, where are we going to send him to school, how's he going to spend his day, and really, I mean, for some folks who don't get services, it's a matter of bringing everyone together and figuring out how you're going to invest in my child. And I think, too, you hang with folks, you get to know people who have been through what you're going through now, which means you find those mentor families, those parents who have done it, who have their kids successfully in school or in a work program or have a job, and you find out how they did those pieces and you emulate that and you get good advocacy through that, I think, because people will come and they'll say, yeah, let's figure out what works for them. We'd love to meet and talk that through.
Do you have an advice for a child going away to college who's pretty self-aware about disclosing the diagnosis to a neurotypical peer group? Do you think that's a good idea, not a good idea?
It's a very individual question. I mean, we always talk to families, and our basic position is we let families do what they think is best for their particular child. I mean, the upsides are that you may be able to get more supports, more help, more understanding. The downsides are you might be excluded from certain things and so forth. I think you need to know a little bit more information about the individual. I think one great entry point would be to go to the Student Disabilities Center and get them to kind of coach and help the child on the ground to figure out, what an appropriate level of self-disclosure might be.
There's also, I think, there's a wonderful guide called 411 Disclosure, and I can email that out. We hopefully one of these days are going to have it up on the website, but it was created in order to assist people with a variety of different disabilities to really understand about self-awareness and how to disclose, when it's appropriate, when that works, what's comfortable for people.
My son actually took part as a control in your virtual classroom, and he absolutely loved it. He thought it was the coolest thing.
That's great.
So I presume kids with autism like it too. But the question was, you talked about reading comprehension problems and autism. How common are verbal comprehension problems and,
How common are reading comprehension?
No, verbal comprehension.
Verbal comprehension. It's a great question. It probably is as high as the reading comprehension, but interestingly, I don't think that there's any clear data on children, elementary and secondary children, who have relatively good verbal skills, who you would not know and you'd have to test to see whether they're having verbal comprehension problems. There isn't very good data on that yet. And it's because a child, I think we've had the schools, all of us have had a prototype of autism that is a child who's very unresponsive and doesn't do anything. And now kids with autism are like everybody else. They have a variety of skills, lots of strengths. And when schools see a child with autism who has strengths, they forget to look for what's difficult for them. They're so pleased that the child has strengths that they don't go in and say, well, they have strengths, but boy, I wonder if they're really understanding everything, because there's a lot of homework problems. There's a lot of misconceptions that are coming up. So we just don't have that information. We will start to have it, but it's this transition we're going in models. The face of autism has changed so much over the last 30 years that schools literally are not prepared for the variability that they're seeing in children. And it's almost like there's two categories: children who are nonverbal and aren't learning very well at all, and all other children. And so we just don't know. But we will eventually.
And my other question was also for Sharon, and I wanted to thank Sharon for the amazing work she does, because Sharon knows I'm really interested in transitions, and we've often talked about pooling resources and doing wraparound kind of services for kids in transition. But my question to you was, people who live, outside of this area and more rural communities, when parents are looking for employment, where do they turn? Other than the regional center, are there resources for people who are not within our area that they can turn to?
Right. The state of California is very diverse, and there's an awful lot in every community. But there's certainly opportunities through one-stop centers, employment development department, Department of Rehab. Those are all services that people can access regardless if they have regional center or not. And you have to really know in your community who you're advocating, what type of work and opportunities are out there for folks. But there's similarities within our communities up and down our state, but if you're more rural, again, you might have the same mandates for services, but you don't have access. And so we're hearing more and more families talking about actually having to move into more, of the larger cities in order to get service, and it really is unfortunate. So we love the challenge. We want to hear from people from Oroville and from Walnut Creek and wherever else they might be living in order for us to help them to figure out what works for them.
Okay, hi. Hope you will forgive us. We came a long way. I'm Paolo, she's Angela from Italy. So it's a very long way. So this is a very specific question. We have a 5-year-old guy, he's a very cute boy, and he has high functioning autism with high IQ. He has improved in the last year a lot with early start Denver model. Now he's 5. Do you think there is a definitive approach that you could advise to us now that is 5, or just should go on with what? And how many hours, according to you, is the right, I don't know, it's difficult to say, of course. You have to tailor therapy to every single case. I'm sure of that, since I'm a urologist, you know, so. But anyhow, could you give us a decent answer?
Sure.
Thanks.
A decent
Thanks
answer.
a lot.
I don't know. I can give you an answer, perhaps.
Because the question was very...
Yeah, no. So I just want to make sure everybody understands. So here's a 5-year-old boy. He's in an intervention program called the Early Start Denver model, which is a very good model because it's sort of child-directed. You follow the attention of the child, and you use the child's interest in order to deliver the intervention. And so it's a very, very productive way to go. It depends now. I don't know whether at age 5 your child would be considered for preschool kindergarten as the next step. And I don't know too much about the Israeli educational system, so I'm a little bit of a disadvantage. But fundamentally, when children move from the preschool interventions into school, you want to think about, if your son is very bright, what the ratio is in the classroom. I mean, ratio in the classroom is going to be very important. How much experience the classroom school teachers have with working with children who are higher functioning children with autism, or autism in general. We're talking about a higher functioning boy. You want to talk to parents about other children that have been in the school and find out how they see the response of children to the curriculum in the classroom. I mean, those 3 things are really the most important things. It's expertise in the classroom, numbers in the classroom, and some sort of information about the response of other children in that system. And that's going to be your best guide, but it won't be the Early Start Denver model. In fact, I'm not exactly sure what's available in Israel right now, but there probably won't be a curricular... Robin, are you going to say something about that?
I was going to say, I think they said Italy.
Oh, Italy, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what's available, thank you. What's available in Italy doesn't matter. It's the same thing. Right. But Sally does go to Italy a lot, that's right. But curriculars, we don't have the same sort of curriculums. I mean, we have 3 or 4 preschool curriculums now that seem to be effective. We have fewer clear, overall organized curriculums for children in school. So therefore, we have to do it school by school, what the schools are doing, rather than looking for a curriculum is the answer that I wanted to give you. Okay?
Hi, my name is Dave Flanders. I heard today's economy we're entering a stage of stagnation. In other words, a lot of the low-lying fruit have already been picked. The good jobs are going to be ones for those who have critical thinking skills and scientific literacy. I was wondering what the Mind Institute is doing to facilitate that direction.
You know, I'll take a shot at that. We would agree, I think. And so one of the things we want to do is try to work with schools on optimizing that potential among students with autism, for example, for whom that potential exists. It might be a lot, it might not be. We really don't know. There's kind of a prototype in many people's minds that people with autism are interested and more capable in science in some cases. But we don't have the information. But we think that going through a reading curriculum is the way to get at that. We can find out, we don't even know what children with autism like to read in schools. Do they have the same reading problems across topic areas? Is science an area or expository reading different than sort of narrative? And so those are the types of things that we're going to try to find out over the next 4 years, and we'll actually have something of an answer to that question over the next few years, because we'll look at how they're achieving in different areas. And it's a very good idea. There's potential there to really push forward on this potential for all children, to identify what children like and what they're capable of, and try to emphasize that in the educational process, but particularly among students who might be struggling in the educational process.
I was just going to point out that actually there have been several studies now showing that reasoning abilities in individuals with autism are relatively better than cognitive ability levels that are tested with more standard, like Wechsler-style tests that also include vocabulary. So reasoning abilities may be an area of untapped strength in people with autism that we can use as a wedge to sort of help them develop some of the other skills. So.
I have a daughter who's 19, and I've observed this to be true, that kids on the spectrum are, they're a lot younger than their chronological age. And, well, I guess what I'm getting to is that I've heard from various sources that there's something approaching magic about the age of 25, and that they do a lot of catching up and become more competent. And I'm just wondering if there's any, actual data to support that.
I'm not familiar with that piece of the 25, but I am familiar with the just transition kind of to the 20s as being a time when individuals do catch up. But there is the countervailing trend that a lot of kids are graduating from high school and sitting in front of the television, and that I would imagine that those kids are not going to see that magic 25. So I think it's really, it's really going to take a lot of planning and support. But I think kids definitely do develop at that point. Sometimes they're just a little bit delayed, our kids with autism.
The other magic thing about the age of 25 is that that's when the federal definition for youth, that's the cutoff date, right? So what's really important between now and 25 is to get everything in place that you can to transition into adulthood, because we still can keep kids on our benefits, we still have kids at home, and they can be a kid or they can be a youth until 25. And then from there, it's pretty much on, and a lot of things get turned off in terms of services and availability for ongoing support. So we really do want to focus in on young people while we have them.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.